In the heart of the dusty Wild West, where the sun beat down relentlessly and the horizon stretched endlessly, there lived a cowboy whose life seemed as barren as the land around him. Day after day, he worked on a small ranch, struggling to make ends meet. His pockets were always empty, and his dreams, once big and full of hope, had shrunk to mere survival. Yet, despite his hardships, the cowboy never gave up. He carried with him a quiet belief that something, or someone, might one day change his luck. It was on one such day, when he had barely a dime to his name, that he encountered a small, scruffy horse being sold for a mere 50 cents. To the untrained eye, she was nothing special, small, unremarkable, and seemingly unfit for anything but the most basic tasks. But something about her eyes, filled with a quiet determination, caught the cowboy's attention. With nothing to lose, he made the purchase, unsure of what he was getting himself into. Little did he know, this tiny, unassuming horse would soon turn his life upside down, propelling him from the depths of poverty to unimaginable wealth. The bond between them would become the foundation for a story of unexpected success, where a humble cowboy and a small horse proved that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unlikely places. The cowboy's life was a constant struggle against the harshness of the land. The sun, unrelenting and unforgiving, had a way of draining the spirit. Every morning, he rose with the dawn, his back aching from the previous day's labor. His boots were worn thin, the soles held together more by dust than leather, and the hem of his faded shirt was frayed from years of hard work. Though his hands were calloused, and his body was built from years of toil, they were not enough to ease the weight of his daily battles. The small ranch he worked on was struggling to stay afloat, barely able to provide for the few cattle he tended to. His wages were meager, enough to pay for the barest of essentials, but never enough to save for anything more. The cowboy's dreams of a better life seemed as distant as the mountains on the horizon. Each day felt like a repetition of the last, filled with sweat, hard work, and the constant fear that the next setback would be his undoing. More than once, he had stood in the empty kitchen of his small, weathered cabin, staring at the barren shelves, wondering how much longer he could keep going. There were times when he could hardly afford a proper meal, and nights when sleep was elusive, haunted by the fear of failure. He knew that he wasn't the only one struggling. The entire town, a collection of weary men and women, lived in the shadow of uncertainty. Yet, despite it all, the cowboy had never lost hope. There was a fire within him, though faint, that told him there was something more waiting out there, something that would change his fate. But on this particular day, as he trudged through the dry earth, dragging himself from one task to the next, the thought of change seemed absurd. The future felt like an unspoken promise, distant and out of reach. He had no idea that, as he made his way to the town's small market, a chance encounter with a horse of all things would alter the course of his life forever. The cowboy's life had been nothing but a series of small, monotonous moments, with little room for excitement or hope. But it was in one of those quiet, uneventful days that the horse's true potential revealed itself. When he had first bought her for a mere 50 cents, the cowboy had no expectations. She was small, scruffy, and looked like any other farm horse that had been overlooked by people who only cared for strength or speed. Her coat was dull, her hooves chipped and cracked from lack of care, and she seemed too fragile to do any real work. But there was something about her that had tugged at the cowboy's heart, a quiet determination in her eyes that mirrored his own. For the first few weeks, their routine was simple. The cowboy fed her, brushed her, and did what he could to keep her healthy, although he didn't see much promise in her. She wasn't fit for ranch work, nor was she fast enough for racing, at least, that's what he thought. He'd often take her on short rides, mostly to keep her exercised and his own mind distracted from the monotony of the daily grind. Yet, even on these casual rides, the cowboy couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her. One late afternoon, as the cowboy was riding along a path near the edge of his ranch, he decided to let the horse run free. He urged her forward, expecting a slow trot, but instead, she took off, her legs moving with a surprising grace and speed. The cowboy, caught off guard by her sudden burst, struggled to keep up. She bounded across the uneven terrain with ease, her small frame darting over rocks and through bushes like a deer. She wasn't just fast, she was precise, nimble, and completely at home in the open land. His heart raced, not just from the ride, but from the realization that this horse, whom he had written off as nothing special, had a natural talent. The cowboy pulled the reins and brought her to a stop, a mixture of awe and disbelief running through him. He couldn't explain it, But there was something about the way she moved, the way she adapted to the environment, that hinted at an extraordinary ability. Her body, small yet powerful, was built for speed and agility, traits that could be honed with the right guidance. Over the next few days, he began to test her further, pushing her to see just how far her abilities stretched. He would take her over small obstacles, guiding her through different terrains, and each time, she responded with an ease that stunned him. She wasn't just fast, she had an innate ability to jump, leap over fences, and navigate rough paths with grace. One morning, as the cowboy watched her expertly maneuver over a fallen tree trunk, a thought crossed his mind. What if she could do more than just help on the farm? What if this small, scruffy horse, this once-forgotten creature, had the potential to become something great? Perhaps she wasn't meant for the life of a lowly farm animal after all. Her hidden talent could be the ticket to a future. He had never imagined a future that no longer seemed out of reach. Excited but cautious, the cowboy decided to test her in a more formal way. He took her to a local race, where horses from all over the region competed. He entered her without much fanfare, still unsure of her true potential. But when the race began, it was clear to everyone and to the cowboy himself that she was no ordinary horse. The small, overlooked horse surged ahead, her legs moving like lightning, her body gliding over the track with a fluidity that left the other competitors in the dust. It was as if she knew this was her moment, her chance to shine. And she did. She crossed the finish line far ahead of the rest, to the stunned cheers of onlookers. The cowboy's heart swelled with pride and disbelief. He had underestimated her, but no longer. This was the turning point. The horse wasn't just a companion, she was a marvel, and her potential was as vast as the horizon itself. The cowboy couldn't stop thinking about the race. That morning, when he'd entered his small, unassuming horse into the competition, he hadn't expected much. After all, she was just a scruffy, lowly creature he'd bought for 50 cents. Yet, when she crossed that finish line, her small frame surging with power, something shifted in him, in her, and in the way the townspeople began to look at them. Word spread quickly through the town. People couldn't believe their eyes when they saw a small horse, one that no one had ever paid attention to before, outpace the region's best. The race had been crowded with highly trained horses, the pride of wealthy ranchers, but none of them had been able to match her speed. She was fast, yes, but there was an undeniable grace to her movements, a natural skill that left the audience awestruck. It wasn't long before the cowboy found himself at the center of conversation in every saloon, marketplace, and stable. "Did you see that little horse?" someone would ask. "Where did she come from? I've never seen anything like it." The cowboy, still reeling from the surprise of it all, had no answers. He simply smiled and nodded, acknowledging the newfound fame he and his horse had earned. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just a one-time fluke. The horse had something special, something people hadn't yet realized. She was a force, and the cowboy had just been lucky enough to recognize it before anyone else. Soon, other ranchers and horse owners took notice. They'd come by the cowboy's small ranch to see the horse for themselves, asking if she was for sale or if they could buy her services. But the cowboy, protective of the small horse who had brought him so much hope, refused every offer. He wasn't going to let anyone take her away. She had become more than a horse to him. She was his ticket to a better life, but more than that, she had proven that even in the direst circumstances, there was a chance for something extraordinary to happen. As weeks passed, the horse's reputation grew. People traveled from neighboring towns to see the miracle horse for themselves. Some came for the spectacle, others out of pure curiosity. The cowboy began entering her into more races, and with each victory, her legend expanded. She was the underdog no one had believed in, now the champion everyone wanted to see. Children would gather around her after each race, brushing her coat and asking the cowboy questions, eager to hear how such an unremarkable horse had become the pride of the town. The small horse's fame reached far beyond the local area. Soon, wealthy investors and horse trainers from other parts of the country began showing interest. They wanted to see if this horse could perform on a bigger stage in larger races with higher stakes. They offered enormous sums of money to the cowboy, tempting him with offers he'd never even dreamed of. But despite the offers and the mounting pressure to sell, the cowboy remained steadfast. His bond with the horse was unbreakable. She wasn't just a winning streak to him, she was family. The cowboy's life, once filled with the weight of struggle and uncertainty, began to change with each victory. He went from barely scraping by to having wealth and opportunity in abundance. His small ranch, once overlooked, was now the home of a local legend, and his name, once barely known, was now spoken with respect and admiration. But even as the money rolled in and the accolades piled up, the cowboy never forgot the humble beginning, the tiny horse he had bought for 50 cents. In time, the town itself embraced her as a symbol of hope, the embodiment of how something small and overlooked could rise to greatness. The cowboy's once dim dreams had transformed into a thriving reality, and at the heart of it all was a horse who had turned his life around, a horse who had become a legend in her own right. As the small horse continued to dominate the local races, word of her success spread like wildfire. Soon, her fame reached beyond the borders of their small town, reaching the ears of people in distant regions. Wealthy ranchers, horse trainers, and even investors who once scoffed at the cowboy's humble beginnings were now eager to meet him, to witness the power of his remarkable horse. One day, a letter arrived from a well-known racing promoter in a neighboring city, inviting the cowboy to enter his horse into a prestigious race with a grand prize. It was an opportunity that could change everything. The cowboy, who had spent most of his life scraping by, knew that this was a chance he couldn't let slip away. Yet, as he stared at the letter, he also knew the stakes were higher than ever. He had always believed in his horse, but now, the pressure to succeed had escalated. Despite his nerves, the cowboy and his horse traveled to the city, where they faced off against some of the best-trained and most prized horses in the country. The event was a spectacle, a crowd of wealthy spectators, glittering prizes, and a race that could make or break careers. The cowboy's heart raced as he led his horse to the starting line, but as soon as the bell rang, all doubts faded. The small horse surged forward, her hooves striking the ground with perfect precision. She darted around the competition, cutting through the air like lightning. The crowd was stunned as she crossed the finish line first, leaving even the most prestigious horses in her wake. The cowboy's heart swelled with pride as the crowd erupted in applause. The victory not only earned him a generous prize but also cemented his place in the world of high-stakes racing. From that moment, things began to change at a rapid pace. The cowboy's name was now synonymous with success, and his small horse was a legend, the symbol of an underdog triumphing against all odds. More race offers flooded in, each one more lucrative than the last. Sponsors, investors, and even media outlets sought out the cowboy, eager to capitalize on his newfound fame. With each race and victory, the cowboy's wealth grew. His once barren ranch now had the resources to expand, and he no longer lived on the edge of poverty. But it wasn't just the money that had changed him. He had gained respect, admiration, and a sense of purpose he had never known before. From the lonely cowboy who had barely scraped by to the owner of a legendary horse, his life had been transformed. In the blink of an eye, the cowboy had gone from struggling to survive to living a life of fortune, all because of the little horse he had bought for a mere 50 cents. But even as the money rolled in, the cowboy never forgot the bond they shared, the quiet, unexpected partnership that had changed both of their lives forever. With fame and fortune came new pressures that the cowboy had never anticipated. The bright lights of success often cast long shadows, and the once quiet life he had known now seemed a distant memory. As the small horse's victories piled up, so did the expectations. People who had once dismissed him now looked to him for more wins, more performances, more of everything. It wasn't long before the weight of those expectations began to take its toll. The horse, despite her natural talent, was not invincible. She had been running hard for months, and even her small, agile frame was starting to show signs of strain. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling race, the cowboy noticed her limping slightly. The once vibrant horse had slowed down, her movements a bit more cautious. The cowboy's heart sank. He had been so focused on her success, so swept up in the whirlwind of wins and fame, that he had forgotten the most important thing, her well-being. Worse still, the pressure from sponsors and investors began to mount. They pushed for more races, demanding that the horse continue performing at the highest level, despite the signs of fatigue. The cowboy, torn between his loyalty to his horse and the allure of the wealth and opportunities being offered, found himself caught in a conflict he hadn't anticipated. He had never wanted this to be about money. It had always been about the bond they shared. But now, that very bond was being tested. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy questioned everything: his choices, his dreams, and whether the price of success was too steep. His once sure path was now filled with uncertainty, and the stakes had never been higher. Amidst the pressure and setbacks, the cowboy found clarity in the quiet moments he spent with his horse. He knew that to continue their journey, they needed a new path, one that honored their bond and their shared journey, rather than just chasing fame and fortune. He took a step back, giving the horse the rest she so desperately needed. They moved away from the constant race circuit, retreating to the solitude of their ranch. The cowboy dedicated himself to her recovery, spending his days with her, caring for her as he had when she was just a small, unremarkable horse. In those moments of quiet, he remembered why they started this journey together, not for glory, but for the simple joy of being in each other's company. As the horse recovered, her spirit returned. Their bond deepened, built on trust and mutual respect. The cowboy no longer sought approval from others or craved the spotlight. He had what he needed: a life with his horse, built on their shared victories, both on and off the racetrack. Together, they carved out a new life, one filled with balance and peace, and without the overwhelming pressure of the outside world. The cowboy knew that no matter what the future held, he had already found the greatest prize of all: the loyalty and companionship of the horse who had transformed his life.